Let's talk about the deficit because that used to be a Republican priority, at least before Donald Trump was president. Uh, i- this is not even an issue that is making the news on a regular basis, but you're raising some really important red flags. What does this mean in the short term and the long term?
Yeah. So I just want to get the facts out there for people because it's easy to lose track of this. So what's happened is we've sort of slowly ramped stuff up in a way that no one's noticed what's going on. So one way of thinking about this, Susan, my guess is 10 years ago, you and I had never used the word trillion, just never used it. There was no point. There's no trillions of anything. There's no trillions of dollars, trillions of people, unless you're studying stars, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, and the global financial crisis in '08 led to a fairly strong fiscal reaction, but it was one measured in hundreds of billions. Then we got to Trump tax cuts and we got to the pandemic, and the response was suddenly measured in trillions. And after the pandemic, I think, demanded a strong fiscal response. I think the reason that my local dry cleaner is still alive, the reason the economy bounced back within a couple of years rather than a couple of decades is partly because of that. But you could disagree. That's fine. What you can't, I think, is indefensible, is to say that the current moment demands the level of spending we have. The deficit right now, so we had those two enormous moments, the '08 financial crisis and the pandemic. If you took them out of the equation, the deficit right now is basically at the highest level it's ever been. I mean, and World War II. You have to get World War II out of there, right? But it's at a level that past administrations wouldn't have gone to in a moment of dire need. So maybe you think we're in a moment of dire need, in which case let's have an honest conversation about it and let's run an honest fiscal policy. Or maybe you keep the news cycle so full of nonsense and garbage that nobody notices you're running a 5.8% of GDP deficit, which in no sense is sustainable. Okay, now let me unwind. What does that mean in the short run? In the short run, if the US is borrowing a lot of money, they're competing with you when you want to borrow money to buy a house. So the interest rates go up. That's the most immediate thing. In the longer run, that remains a very, very important factor. The other thing is you actually get to the point where the level of debt that we've accumulated becomes so high that the US economy becomes quite vulnerable. Let me explain. Actually, great that you've got that 100% of GDP milestone. So the level of debt in the United States just crossed 100% of GDP, which it hasn't done since World War II. Some people, 100% sounds like a magic number. There's nothing magic about it. It's just saying 1 year's production, so 365 days of production, that's how big our debt is. Fair enough. That puts us not as the highest industrialized country in the world, but not far off. Japan's at 136%. It's among the highest points it's ever been in our past. At one level, there's a direct problem. I don't like being deeply in debt because then I'll have to repay the money, or the way we'd say it in fiscal terms is our children inherit the debt. Now, the flip side is our children are going to inherit a wonderful world, hopefully, and we've given them easier and better, richer, fuller lives than was given to our grandparents. And so maybe you don't worry about that. But I think you need to worry about vulnerability to a fiscal crisis. Let me now explain what that is. I'm sorry if I sound like a textbook. When I do
Not at
that,
all.
stop me. I ate a textbook for breakfast this morning. Sorry. So at the moment, our debt is high, but everyone believes we can repay it. Because they believe we can repay it, they charge us low interest rates. Because the interest rates are low, our monthly payments are low, and therefore we can repay it. So this is a virtuous circle in which our ability to repay leads to low interest rates, which leads to low payments, which makes it easy to repay. Fantastic. Let me tell you a lesson that countries like Argentina learned. If suddenly the world wakes up and says, I'm worried you can't pay,
Right.
then what they'll do is they'll jack up the interest rate. Well, if you jack up the interest rate, now you just jacked up my monthly payment. If you've jacked up my monthly payment, maybe I can't pay it. in which case they were right to raise the interest rate. And that's what's called a fiscal crisis.
Mhm.
Now, the thing I want you to notice about that vicious cycle is it's only really vicious if you have a lot of debt. Because if you have a small amount of debt, if they raise the interest rate, but you don't owe a lot of money, your monthly payment wasn't very big anyway. So if you double a tiny monthly payment, you can still make it. But if you double a huge monthly payment, you're in trouble. The bigger our debt gets, the more vulnerable we become to something like that. I want to be clear. I'm not coming out and saying economist says fiscal crisis is just around the corner. But I am saying it becomes more possible the more we walk down this road. Susan, can I give another third answer?
Yes.
Just have a third one I really want to give. What we've seen is Reagan blew out the deficit,
Mhm.
and Democrats repaired it. And then Bush blew out the deficit, and then Democrats repaired it. And then Trump blew out the deficit. Biden didn't repair it, but he held back a little bit. Could have been worse. And the question
That
I
was
want
also post-COVID, as we've talked about.
yeah, the logic of this, I think, actually makes great political sense, which is Republicans used to be fiscally conservative. They're not. Just
Mhm.
literally not. If you want to be fiscally conservative, don't vote for a Republican. Not in the last 50 years. But there is a logic to what they're doing. It's not the logic of fiscal conservatism. It's if I spend all the money, there's no money for my opponent to spend when they're president.
Mhm.
So now here's what's difficult, and I think fundamentally risks breaking a lot.
Mhm.
If the next Democratic president were to call me and say, Justin, the debt to GDP ratio is really high. We owe a lot of money. The deficit's large. What should we do? Is the advice that I give clean up because you're the adults in the room, or play the same game they're playing, spend as much as you want and leave it for them to clean up?
Mhm.
There's a lot of talk now that Democrats don't need to be the only adults in national politics. And if that's the case, then we move from a system with one set of fools to a system with two sets of fools. And that terrifies me. But equally, I don't know how to call my Democratic friends and say, you should keep batting clean up
Mhm.
behind these guys.
Right, and especially because a lot of core, Democratic priorities have been cut even though we've been spending, because 'cause we've spent a lot of money in Iran, and we've spent a lot of money on tax cuts that have disproportionately gone to the 0.01%, and as a result, we're, still cutting programs like SNAP and, healthcare subsidies, things the Democrats, if they get back in power, would very much like to spend more money on, and where do you fall in that? Because there are positive economic impacts of trying to strengthen some parts of the safety net that have been cut, but at the same time, there's the overall economy to worry about and the deficit.
Right. And so the issue that I was just describing is actually less economics and more politics. Right. So we're in this if I were asked for my view and the next Republican administration is going to be like the last one, then I would learn that every dollar we sock away is going to be spent irresponsibly by the next set of Republicans on tax cuts for the rich.
Mhm.
Then I don't want to be fiscally conservative anymore.
Mm.
The net effect is not fiscal conservatism. The net effect is irresponsible spending by the other side, which means that we're going to be in this game of chicken. And I don't know how to stop the car.
Mm.
I really don't. And Susan, like, I'm an economist who worries about fiscal sustainability. Yet still, it's not obvious that I should give the advice to the next Democratic administration to be fiscally responsible. I don't see how I can do that and just let the other side get all the spending for its priorities.
Mhm. It's a really sobering thought. I wanted to talk to you since you brought up interest rates.
Well,
I
can I
wanted to
just pause
talk.
on that point? I want to be sunny and optimistic now.
Okay, we'll do our best.
Here's what we need.
Okay.
a general public that knows and understands and cares about fiscal issues. If it does, that
Mhm.
changes the electoral calculus, and then both sides have an incentive to be grown-ups.
Mhm.
And so that let's talk about economics. I love what you're doing here,
Mhm.
right? Because if we do that, that's the
Mhm.
only way out of that mess.